Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Meezan lecture series. So we have been studying Ustaz Ghamidi's Meezan for the past many weeks. Recently, we started a chapter which is called Fundamental Principles. In fact, it is the first preamble to his book. And this chapter actually discusses the sources of religion and also how we can derive directives from these sources. In our last session, we discussed how these sources of religion manifest themselves in the form of the Quran and the Sunnah. In fact, what is more accurate to say is that the source of religion, the sole source of religion, is Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him. And from him, religion was given to us in the form of the Quran and the Sunnah. We already took a deep look at the Sunnah of the Prophet and how these practices crystallized after Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, and how they were revived by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and given currency in his ummah. We also looked at hadiths and saw that as far as these narratives are concerned, they are basically the initiative of the Sahaba themselves. The Prophet never ever asked them to disseminate them. The Sahaba themselves, the companions themselves, took this initiative and they thought that the knowledge of the Prophet must be propagated and disseminated. And as such, they decided to transmit his words. We also know that a very large part of this transmission is basically transmission on the basis of understanding, which means an event or the words of the Prophet, the way they were understood by various narrators, have been transmitted. Very few of these narrations are verbatim. For example, we know that certain supplications of the Prophet are verbatim, and similarly, some proverbial sentences of the Prophet could be also regarded to be as verbatim. Other than that, these are basically understanding of a narrator that we find ourselves being faced to in the compositions of our these scholars. So in our last session, we had seen that how the Quran and the Sunnah have an impact and how actually the Sunnah, which has been a subject of hot debate in the last many centuries, has been crystallized as a separate entity from Hadith literature. Normally in our past studies, in our past scholarly presentations, Hadith and Sunnah have been amalgamated. They don't find any distinction between us and they are used synonymously. But Ustaz Ghamidi has made this distinction that Sunnah is the established practice of the Prophet and it is it gives certitude in the way it has been transmitted, the way the Quran itself gives certitude. However, Hadith, of course, is not of the same caliber or the same category. These are independent and individual narrations that have to be judged, that have to be gauged on the basis of isnad and also on the basis of their content. Today we're going to start off a subshoot of this whole understanding, and that is that if these are the sources of the Quran, of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah, then how exactly do we derive directives from these sources? Of course, Quran and the Sunnah, they are the primary sources or the real sources. Hadith also, because of the fact that it is based on the Quran and Sunnah, and it also needs to be understood. So it also needs certain principles of understanding. So we'll take a look at all these three principles, principles of understanding the Quran or the Sunnah and the Hadith. But to start off, we'll look at the principles which Ustaz Ghamidi has coined in order to understand the Quran. So you can see that these are 10 in number and we will take them up one by one. So the first one of them is appreciation of classical Arabic. The second is eloquence of language. The third is uniqueness of style. The fourth is the final authority. All these, of course, pertaining to the Quran. The fifth is parallel verses and constructions. The sixth is the final book on religion. Seven is a chronicle of Muhammad's inzar. Eighth is the coherence in the discourse. Ninth is arrangement of the Quran. And the last and 10th principle is historical background. So we will take a look at all these 10 principles one by one and see that how they shape our understanding of the Quran and how it is essential for a student of the Quran to have a very deep grasp of these principles, these indicators. They are primarily pieces of guidance, or we can say they are benchmarks, they are lighthouses in their own selves, which guide a student of the Quran as he navigates through the text of the Quran. So let's start off with the very first principle, which is appreciation of classical Arabic. So what has to be understood is that the Quran has been revealed in the classical Arabic spoken in Mecca. It was spoken in the age of Jahiliyyah by the tribe of Quraysh. And no doubt the Almighty has endowed it with inimitable eloquence and articulacy in the Quran, yet As far as its substance is concerned, it is no different from the one spoken by the Messenger of God, and which in those times was the tongue of the people of Mecca. So the Quran has recorded these words. فَإِنَّمَا يَسَّرْنَاهُ بِلِسَانِكَ لِتُبَشِّرَ بِهِ الْمُتَّقِينَ وَتُنْزِرَ بِهِ قَوْمَ اللُّدَّ. Thus, O Prophet, we have made this Quran very easy and apt in your tongue, so that through it you may proclaim glad tidings to those who fear God and fully warn these stubborn people through it. Uh, Thus, a correct understanding of this book, it's absolutely essential, is dependent on the correct knowledge and true appreciation of this language. So remember, the Quran is couched in classical Arabic idiom, and one has to have a very deep grasp of this idiom. It is essential that a person who wants to reflect on the Quran and attempt to interpret and explain it should be a very competent scholar of this language. He has to be a very, very adept scholar of this language. He should also be adept in appreciating its styles and linguistic features, so that at least the language is not an impediment to him in understanding the Quran. Another important thing that has to be understood is that as far as the language of the Quran is concerned, which every student of this divine book should be well aware of, is that this Arabic is not the Arabic in which poets like Hariri and Al-Mutanabbi had composed their masterpieces, nor is it the Arabic in which Zamakhshari and Ar-Razi, two very famous commentators of the Quran who lived in the 6th and the 7th centuries. Hariri, of course, lived in the 6th century, and Mutanabbi lived in the 4th century. Zamakhshari and Razi, Zamakhshari living in the 6th century and Razi in the 7th century. So all these, of course, they wrote Arabic, but the Arabic of the Quran is entirely different from what the Arabic of these people was or were when they were writing their own treatises. Also, it must be kept in mind that the newspapers which are currently published in Arab countries is also not what reflects the Arabic of the Quran. It is the prose and poetry of the literati which is written today that also does not reflect the.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum everyone. There are some technical issues currently going on right now, but inshallah they'll be resolved really quickly. So Dr. Saleem should be back really soon.
Just change the format of the session and convert it into a general Q&A session, because cannot go on like this.
Dr. Saleem, should I start with the questions?
Please do. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So our first question asks, Salam Sheikh, I need your counseling with regards to gender interaction. Earlier, I have had healthy and respectful interactions with family and friends. As soon as I have been exposed to diverse opinions, like default is to avoid gaze, avoid listening to polite or joyful voice of females because a man is always sexually active, and few narrations like women is a trail. By these references, some opinions made me hypersensitive and self-doubting. I often experience granule response worsely and OCD because of fear. Please guide me textually and psychologically to come out of this notion that every emotion is only driven by lust towards the opposite gender.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a very, very incorrect picture of what the Quran has asked us. It's based primarily on, I don't know how they've come to this conclusion. The Quran does not at all address this issue that it's because of the lust of the opposite gender that you're required to maintain a certain decorum. On the very contrary, the Quran says the opposite. It says that in order to purify your own selves, in order to become a pure individual in your own hearts, there are certain etiquette and mannerisms that you have to follow. Both men and women, they have to follow certain etiquette, a certain decorum when they interact with one another. And the reason for maintaining this decorum is not that if they don't do so, then the opposite gender would lust for them, or they'll have feelings of sexual nature arise. That's not what the Quran has said at all. All such instances, the words used by the Quran are zalika azka lakum, which means that if you do so, it will be good for your own purification. It will be good for your own personal inner cleansing. So the person who is asking should rest assured he or she should not fret in any way if he or she is observing a certain etiquette. It's primarily for a person's own self. And this is something that they have to understand at all costs. So I think that as far as the Quran is concerned, it's just an erroneous interpretation that has led people to such extremes. And I'm so sorry to hear that such is the nature of this misunderstanding, that it has gone as far as to produce OCD and some psychological problems. And I would not blame the person at all. I think it's basically a wrong presentation on the part of religious scholars, which I do apologize on whose behalf. And I think that all that the person needs to concentrate is that these norms are, I mean, there's two of these norms need to be discussed. As far as men and women are concerned, they are common. So one of them is that you have to restrain your gaze from lusting after the opposite gender, which means that just don't look at the opposite gender in a way that might arouse yourself, which means that you just look at them in a normal way. And the second norm, which is again advised to both genders, is that they must wear a decent dress which does not display their contours of their body, their physical shape of the body. The third directive is given to women, which is that if they have worn jewelry on places other than their faces, their hands, and their feet, then that limb must be covered. If there's no jewelry worn in any of these places, which are exceptional to these places, then they don't need to cover those as well. So if they're wearing some makeup or jewelry on their face or their hands and their feet, that is absolutely fine, because these are limbs that are normally kept bare. Only limbs which are not kept bare, like for example your hair or maybe other parts of the body, if you have embellished them, then they need to be covered. So this is a very simple decorum that the Quran has described, and unfortunately we made a mess out of it, and because of this we have produced such psychological ailments in people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Ammar Rasul, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sahab. Dr. Sahab, my question is, Dr. Sahab, this thing about whether sort of this discussion between qadar or destiny and between free will, it has been discussed by you and Ghamidi Sahab many times, and during these discussions again and again it has been said that basically God does not make a decision or treat a person in present time based on his knowledge about what the person is going to be like in the future. Like if the person is going to be a bad person in the future, God does not treat that person negatively or in a bad way in the present time, and that person still has free will in the present time to change his path or not go down the wrong path. And this is what I have understood, from your talks about this subject, and also Ghamidi Saab's talks about this subject. But Dr. Saab, my question is, or my confusion in my mind is that when we look at Surah Kahf and the incident detailed in Surah Kahf regarding Hazrat Musa and Hazrat Khizr, in that story, with every incident, God is basically giving us an example of how, based on his knowledge about the future and how things are going to turn out in the future, he is interfering in people's lives, so much so that one boy who is of a very young age is also killed because he's going to be a bad person in the future. And so this creates a big confusion in my mind, in the sense that it seems like God is sometimes choosing to interfere based on his knowledge about the future in people's lives, and sometimes, or most of the times, he refrains and lets people exercise their free will. So what is the reality of this, sir? This is my question.
So yes, this is a very important part of philosophical understanding of religion, because free will, which is of course confused with determinism and fatalism, is thought to be in conflict. However, if you look at this incident, these are basically three happenings which took place between Moses and Khizr alayhi salam in that journey. None of these happenings is something in which the Almighty is interfering to the extent that he is fixing their destiny. I mean, it's like every one of us has got to die. Every one of us has a certain lifespan. Similarly, there are incidents which occur in our lives. So these are things that are beyond our own control. So, I mean, things which are beyond our own control are governed by external circumstances in which God also interferes, and in which He creates things and events which interfere with our plans. So that's like a overall. I mean, it's like an overall planning of the Almighty Himself. It does not mean that we are supposed to be part of that by actually being pushed to do something. So you see, it's not that we are in any of these incidents. If you look at any of these incidents, it's not that the person is being forced to do something. It's basically externally the events are created in such a way that they do interfere with some part of his life. For example, early death can come to him. For example, some damage can come to his assets, as was the case with the ship being damaged. Similarly, it is always possible that some treasure that was being hidden for some reason is something which is protected by the Almighty. So these are things external to our own willful behavior. It's like things which God has planned for us regarding our future undertakings. So when we speak of fatalism and determinism, it actually means that our actions are driven by the Almighty, which is not. I mean, external events are planned by the Almighty, which is a different thing than saying that our actions are governed or propelled or driven by the Almighty. So if we do not intermingle these two things, I don't think there should be any confusion. Primarily because you're probably thinking that this external happening of events is like shaping our destiny in the sense that it is forcing us to do certain things. So I think these are two independent things. The fact that I get up in the morning, I drink a glass of water, eat my breakfast, and go to the office. So these are all actions that I take out of my own free will. But for example, when I go out to my office and if my car meets an accident, that is something which is beyond my authority, maybe, or beyond my will. Because if some other car is going to bump into my car, then that is something which is not my part of any expression of my freedom. So it's basically the other person interfering, and in a larger sense, it is basically God's scheme which is going along. So if you look at both these situations in a parallel way, in an independent way, I think there should not be any confusion.
Dr. Saab, if I can very quickly be allowed to sort of like put a follow-up question to the same thought, which is, I understand your sort of like answer about determinism and free will, and that was not the confusion that I had from the beginning. My confusion was, on what basis does God decide that yes, in this particular case, I am going to actually interfere through circumstances or through how this person maybe if he can be given some ill health or even death. So for example, we see that many people around us who are actually perpetrating evil on this earth have been allowed to live, have been allowed to continue living, and they have been allowed to perpetrate their evil. But yet that boy was stopped from doing that. So on what basis does God decide that this person is going to be allowed to continue to be evil, and this person is going to be stopped much before time, even before they become evil and they're still a child?
Right. So you see, this is not a question of determinism and fatalism. It is basically a question of God's interference or His planning. And this is something which God has said in a very concise way, that it is based on His own knowledge and wisdom. So there is some wisdom in every act of God, and that wisdom we might be able to know in hindsight when, for example, things have already taken place. So if you look at this particular incident, the Almighty actually explained this wisdom by telling us that had that person been allowed to live, that boy, he would have caused nuisance for his family. So it's just telling us that at times, when children pass away at an early age, we think that something terrible has happened. But in the scheme of God, it's not terrible, because in the overall grand scenario, that person was going to damage somehow his parents. So basically, it's God's wisdom and knowledge. And that wisdom and knowledge itself is governed by this principle of trial and test. So this world has been created on the basis of trial and test. And these incidents and these problems, these deaths and these ailments that we come across, the wars that we fight, the poverty that we come across, they're all forms of trial. And this trial is basically governed by God's knowledge and wisdom. So His knowledge and wisdom it creates events so that this trial should go on in our lives in various forms. And of course, various forms of these trials are the death of a near one, or some loss to your property, or maybe something that you might lose in the form of wealth. So this is how I understand it. It's form of his trial, and that trial itself is governed by his knowledge and wisdom. But that in no way infringes on our free will.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have a bunch of questions in the chat, but before I continue with these, I'd like to let all the participants know if you have questions, please raise your hands now or post them in the chat so I can allocate the right amount of time for everyone so that we don't have questions coming in the last 10 minutes and it's like 15 questions. So please do it sooner rather than later. The next question asks, kindly please elaborate the scope of the word al in Darood we recite in prayers.
So the word al actually, if you look at the literal translation, it refers to both children, which is progeny, the immediate progeny, and to the next generation of a person. For example, when we say Al Ibrahim, it can either refer to immediately the son or the children of Abraham, of course, not just the son, but the daughters as well. So the immediate children of Abraham can also be implied by Al Ibrahim. And the word Al can also encompass all his progeny. So these are the two linguistically possible translations. Now, as far as their usage is concerned in the root, of course, this is a area in which scholars have differed. So some people say that basically it refers to the status of Prophet Abraham's progeny, which of course was given to it by the Quran, and I think that this view is more correct. When we say Al Ibrahim, it refers to all the progeny of Abraham, because we know that the progeny of Abraham, first the Israelites and then the Ishmaelites, they were given the status of the witnesses of God's religion to the rest of mankind. And as such, they were given this status. As such, they were invested with this status. And this is a coveted status. But remember, they did not all of them fulfilled this responsibility. And there were periods of times in which they were shirking this responsibility. But nevertheless, as far as God is concerned, He gave this glad tidings to the progeny of Abraham that if they stick to the truth and justice, then they would be leaders of mankind in this whole world by the scheme of God. So I think in the Durood, when we say Allahumma barik kama barakta ala Ibrahima wa ala ali Ibrahim, it actually refers to the progeny of Abraham. And when we talk about Prophet Muhammad and Allah Muhammad, so again, it has to be the context that decides. So if there is a particular context to refer to his immediate progeny, which is of course his daughters and his sons who passed away, then that would be the case. Otherwise, of course, it will extend to his children also. But in most cases, you'll find the word Allah Muhammad referring to his immediate family.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, if lowering the gaze is general for all women, then why did Hazrat Umar did not allow slave women to wear as free women during the Prophet's time? Also, after the post-prophetic era, why were slave women sold in poor conditions and free men were allowed to gaze at them? And some fiqh books mention on how to check them also. Does lowering of gaze only apply to free women and not slave women?
So first of all, let me correct this, that it's not the lowering of the gaze that is implied, and because the word Yavzuzna min absarihinna, which is the actual words of the Quran, they are translated as lowering the gaze. It means that you just need to look at the ground and just walk by, looking at the ground or groping at the ground, and then maybe you can even stumble. So what the Quran actually here implies is that there should be decency in your eyes. So the thus part here is used metaphorically. It's more symbolic. So lowering here actually refers to the fact that there should be decency. The gaze should not lust after individuals. So in that situation, you can look at any person, and whether it's whether any woman or any person of the opposite gender, in fact, whether man or woman. However, as far as the directives which relate to slave girls are concerned, so remember they are more related to a cultural setting of those times. Slavery was to be abolished, And because it was to be abolished, most of the directives which related to slave women were not tampered with. I mean, like, for example, their dressing or the way you would look at them, because they had to go away in any case, because slavery was going to end in any case. So instead of reforming some of the outer directives, slavery was thought to be uprooted from its basis. So that is why, in my personal understanding, the institution itself was outlawed, and the way it was done was in a gradual way. And I think we have discussed this a number of times in some lectures, maybe you can refer some of them, that slavery was abolished. It was just that new slaves were never allowed to be made, because the source of those slaves were battles. And right at the first battle, which is the Battle of Badr, right after that, it was said that you cannot enslave any prisoner of war. So all that the people were left with were old prisoners or old slaves, and for them a gradual eradication scheme was given. And right near the end of the Prophet's ministry, we know that in Surah Nur, it was said that you must liberate all slaves who would like themselves to be liberated, as long as they could guarantee that they will not become a nuisance in the society. After that, only those slaves were left in houses of people who for themselves wanted to stay there, because for generations they were living with the family and they wanted to live with that family. So this is what the Quran has said. But unfortunately, as the questioner has asked, that this practice did continue unabated later on as well. As far as the time of the Prophet is concerned, we find that none of these things took place. But later on, it does seem that this directive of the Quran was subject to a lot of discussion and debate and misinterpretation. And because of, I've already referred to these two verses in Surah Mu'minun and Surah Ma'arij, which actually say that you can have sexual relations with your wives and your slave women. People thought that these are verses that are giving us an eternal permission to have intimacy with them. Whereas we have discussed them that these two verses just related to that transient and temporary period in which slavery was gradually eradicated. And because it was gradually eradicated, so in that gradual or in that interim period, the way things were, the way things stood, it was allowed that they happen the way they used to happen, including intimacy, including how to stare at these women, including what they should wear. Because, as I said, at the end of the day, the whole institution was supposed to have been abolished.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I've posted the link to your eradication of slavery in the chat for those interested in checking that out. The next question asks, it's about ghibat or backbiting. What if someone has wronged you and abused you? Is it considered ghibat to talk to somebody or someone about how badly you were treated?
That's not true. Actually, the definition of backbiting is that you speak about the demerits or the bad habits of a person, and the purpose of this is that you want to belittle that person, want to insult or humiliate that person. So it's not just a simple fact that you're expressing or you're basically talking about the bad habits of a person. The motive of talking in this way is that you would like to humiliate him. So in such a situation in which you have described, because there's no such intention there, so this cannot be termed as backbiting at all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Ammar Rasul, please go ahead.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, I wanted to ask you a question about this time just before the Maghrib namaz, which we have been raised to believe is a time where we should not be offering any prayers, and the reason for that obviously has been discussed many times by our elders and scholars as well. My question to you is that if we look at this reasoning logically, this can only apply to people who are living to the east of the Kaaba, because when they turn towards the Kaaba, only then the setting of the sun will coincide or will match the direction of the Kaaba. The people living to the west of the Kaaba, if they are praying during just before the sunset, the sun will be behind them. So my first part of the question is, how does it apply to people living to the west of the Kaaba, this restriction that we cannot pray or we should not pray just before sunset? And secondly, sir, if we know this reason that during those times there could be this confusion that people are maybe praying to the sun or to the setting sun, now a true Muslim, they know that that is not the case. And even if they are praying 5 minutes before sunset, they are praying to the Almighty. Do you think that this is still applicable or should be applicable? So this is my question.
Okay, as far as this question is concerned, at the time of prostration, at time of sunrise and sunset, so first that it has to be understood that it's not, I mean, it's just a couple of minutes before sunrise and couple of minutes before and after sunrise and a couple of minutes before and after sunset. So time is hardly about 5 or 6 minutes. And the reason for that is that even today there are nations that still worship the sun. If you look at the Chinese, some of the Chinese groups and some of the other ancient groups, they still exist and they do prostrate before the sun. So I do still think that it does apply because basically it's like more of a precautionary thing, and because our religion is very, very sensitive to polytheism and it does not tolerate any forms of it if they exist in our world today. So it does seem to me, in the interest of precaution, that we should continue with this observing this precaution, because as I said, that today even the manifestations of paganism in various religions still exist, and people still, especially, I had this question in mind as well, so I did some research and found out that even today there are some Eastern religions, particularly in China, that still have this feeling for, they express this holy feeling for the sun, and they still call him sun god. Let's call it sun god. So I think that is one part of your question. As far as the other part is concerned, in which you said that in the West, the sun is always behind. So you see, when the Prophet was talking about these things in the Sunnah, it's not because of any geographical or scientific reality. He was just speaking in plain, simple terms that wherever there is sunset and wherever there is sunrise, regardless of where the sun itself is, because human beings think that now the sun has arisen and now sun has gone away, because human emotions are attached to it. So regardless of where actually the geographical relation to the sun is, this directive was given because people did not go according to these geographical understandings. They went after what they observed in the sky. So when they observed the sun was rising, they would prostrate before him. And when they observed that the sun was setting, they would also prostrate before it. So, I mean, this is basically how people used to do. And the Quran said, of course, that every manifestation of polytheism must be done away with, and therefore the Prophet was asked to give this directive to the Ummah.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question asks, why are we urged to ask for blessings and barakah of Allah on His prophets when we already know that He's already blessed?
It's like expressing our close affiliation to the Prophet. We know about the fact that the Prophet, peace be upon him, has been forgiven in all intents and purposes, and so are all the prophets of God because of their extreme due diligence. But when we pray for their forgiveness, or when we pray for their success in the hereafter, even to be in the sense that we would like to send blessings to them, it is basically our sense of appreciation of their work, for which we thank them. I mean, they don't need our gratitude. It is we who express our. It's like saying that God does not need our gratitude, but He still says that you thank Him, isn't that? The reason being that it actually reflects back on your own self. That when you thank the Almighty for His innumerable favors, it is like you're doing justice to your own self, and this is an acknowledgement of the truth. So, in a very similar way, when you are expressing your blessings for the Prophet, he does not need them. It is basically we who need to express our appreciation of what He did for us and how He sacrificed so many things for us and how we owe so much to Him.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks if you may please elaborate the phrase "Zaban muntaq nahi nataq hai."
So basically, this is a very famous sentence attributed to the Farsi scholars. It says that language is not something which is based on logic. Language is something which is based on usage. Language is something which is not based on logic. It is basically something which is based on, which actually conforms to usage. Just to give you some examples that might help you understand what this phrase means. So I think I've given this example earlier on, so I'll give it again. For example, if I say that I meet you every day of the month, and I say that we meet every day, and as let's say we are class fellows, and I tell my class fellow that, well, look, you should have confided this problem with me. After all, don't we meet every day? So the word every day now is used according to the usage, which means that even if you meet times a, 5 times a week, even then it would be correct to say that we meet every day. Although we've not met for 2 days, I mean, we just met for 5 days. So language is not logic. It is not governed by logic, because if it goes by logic, you would say immediately that, well, you said that we met every day, whereas the fact is that we just met for 5 days or maybe 20 days of the month, and you say that we have met every day. So it speaks more in general terms. So this is how, I mean, this is a very simple example to give you this idea that things don't work in language the way they work in logic. Another example maybe that could also illustrate the point is that the Quran says, "Min kulli shay'in khalaqna zawjayn," which means that we have made every single thing as pair. Again, it doesn't mean that it means every single thing per se. It means that predominantly God has created a lot of things in pairs. Even in the Quran, if you look at the fact that the Quran has said that every surah occurs in pairs, but if you look, you'll find that there are 5 or 6 surahs which are an exception to this rule, and they don't actually conform and become pair to any other surah. So would that mean that the Quranic verse which says that we have made this Quran in which surahs occur in pairs to be a false statement? No, of course, because the way it is used here is in the form of usage and language, in which when you talk about certain thing in the language, if the dominant part can be thought to exist, then you can say it very comfortably that yes, everything has been made in such a way. So, in short, what you can say is that the way you speak your own language, it could not just, I mean, it's not just the Arabic language, it goes with every single language. The linguistic style is always predominant. It actually encompasses styles that you are not in any way making them count in logical terms as 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is what this phrase means, that Zaban nutq hai mantiq. Zaban is basically something which consists of usage and not of logic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Ammar Rasul, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. But sir, I had this question. I have asked you about the liberation of Algeria from the colonialism of France before as well, and about the moral questions that it raises, that these people indulged in the freedom fighters, they indulged in guerrilla warfare, and what that meant is that obviously they were bombing civilian populated areas, and eventually they won their freedom. And your point of view obviously was, from a moral point of view, very, very clear that this is something that is not allowed in Islam, and that is understandable. And religion's directive in this matter is that it is much better for people to live under occupation and in slavery rather than winning their liberation through such means. This is what I understood from what your answer was about this moral conundrum at a previous stage. So my follow-up question to this is, how can something good be achieved out of an evil act? Like, for example, these people who fought for the liberation and did a great sin and broke the rules of God, that has now resulted in millions and millions of people living peacefully, in a free society where they can follow their religion freely and live their lives freely without occupation or without subjugation of a colonial power. Is it possible that a balanced free society can be achieved through such evil acts where the rules of God are being broken? Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, it is very much possible, and we have witnessed this at a number of instances in this world, and this is what we call the Robin Hood phenomenon. So remember what Robin Hood did? He used to plunder the rich people, and he would give the money from the rich to the poor people, and as such, a lot of prosperity resulted. So remember, there are very few people who are rich. So what he would do is he would plunder those rich people, would loot their wealth, and then have them distributed among the poor people. So, there are several other examples that have been given in some wars that were fought in the past, and some actions that were taken by the government, and the way that were taken were absolutely illegal. But they resulted, for example, there has been instances in which a power was actually confiscated from democratic governments in an illegal way, and the resulting political setup of an armed rule actually made the country prosper. So you see, Islam does not recognize any Robin Hood principle. It says to achieve something good, the methodology of achieving that must be good as well. If you achieve something good out of that, you might be able to do that, but then it will cause a lot of disruption in other areas and more so, of course, in your life in the hereafter, because the manner in which you have done something is against the law, and it has broken several other moral principles. So if you achieve something good out of a bad act, it has no value before God. Another example that comes to my mind, if you look at the Quran, is how liquor and gambling have been discussed in Surah Baqarah. So remember, liquor and gambling, about them, the Arabs used to use them for a very positive way. So they would drink a lot of wine, and then in this inebriation, they would slaughter a lot of animals, in particular camels. And then they would gamble on the meat of the camel. And each gambler, when he would win a portion of meat, he would not keep that meat to himself. He would keep that meat that he would have won in gambling. He would distribute it among the poor people who would have gathered at that time when these gambling gatherings would take place. And the Quran said, "Ismuhuma akbaru min nafihima," meaning that the evil of this is much greater than the benefit that you think it is giving. So what we have to understand is that the way you achieve something has to be equally good. And the word good actually does not merely refer to the outcome, it refers to the way that you do that as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next question comes from Salman Aziz. Please go ahead.
There was a saying by Ustad Javed Ghamidi, and it was regarding the language generally and from the language of Quran also, कि जबान जो है वो मंतक नहीं है बल्कि नुत्क है. Would you could please let me understand this thing?
So I just answered the question by saying that the very question he has asked was answered by me 5 minutes ago. Whether he was asking about the same question, that language is nutq and not mantiq. I think that I just replied to it about 5 minutes ago, and maybe his earphone or maybe whatever listening device is there for him was not working.
Yeah, I would recommend him to listen back to the recording of this session, which will be posted on YouTube. And of course, the link to that will be also shared on the WhatsApp groups. So please watch out for those. They'll be out in a couple of days, inshallah. Our next question asks, a particular faction considers Uthman radiallahu anh committed nepotism and economic disparity and assassinated him on these grounds. What is the reality in these historic records?
I don't think we can ever be able to reach the reality in these historical records, except for the fact that we have to trust Usman's intention that he would not have done something willfully wrong. And maybe if he did appoint people to these posts, he thought that they merited them on the basis of their competence. However, there are other people who did not regard this to be true, and they thought it was pure nepotism. So I think that this is a matter that we should leave to history and to the historian to judge, and ultimately for God to judge. But as far as I think that all people, especially the caliphs, they were very, very purely, they had pure intention, they were sincere, and in spite of sincerity, the other option or the other outcome can also not be ruled out, that maybe they did make a mistake, but they were sincere. They tried their best, but ultimately what they thought was correct, it did not turn out to be correct. So maybe Usman did think that he was appointing someone on merit, but maybe it was his wrong decision, because after all, he was a human being. So remember, it's not how you take, the decision itself is concerned. It's basically how you take that decision. If you take a decision in all fairness, in honesty and sincerity, then that is what counts before God, even if it is a wrong decision. So I leave this matter to God, and I think that this is a matter in which maybe we can never be able to reach the truth, because there's so much on both sides. All that we can say, or I can perhaps say safely, is that looking at his own character, he would not have done something wrong intentionally. Maybe he was, maybe he did a mistake, maybe, but then it was an unintentional mistake.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all the questions so far. We have another 4 minutes. So, okay, last question, Amma Rasul, and then we'll end the session, inshallah.
So, Dr. Sahab, my last question, is not so much about the Quran, but about an incident which has troubled me for a really long time. This is the incident where near the Prophet's death, he wanted to leave some. He's supposed to have asked for a pen and paper, although that is also strange because we are told that the Prophet was an unlettered person. He could not read or write. But in any case, it is famous that he asked for a pen and paper, and it was actually Hazrat Umar who said to him that you have given us in the Quran, and so no other messages are necessary. That seems to me to be a very strange thing for a Hazrat Umar to have done. First of all, how do you see this? Do you think that this is an accurate counting of a real incident? And also, is there any study over what the Prophet might have wanted to write during this incident, if this is actually true? How do you see this, sir?
Well, a number of studies have been conducted on this incident. You might just type it in Google and you'll find that this incident has been critically analyzed. And I don't think it is tenable at all that has happened. It seems that the narrators have mixed up things. And because of this mixing up, it probably seemed that it happened in the way they have been reported by. But you'll see how the isnad of this incident as well as the chain of narration have been criticized by scholars. And I do believe that this incident is not correctly reported.
Rasul, do you have any follow-up?
No, I mean, if Dr. Saab has an opinion that this incident is not accurate and it never happened, then obviously there are no more questions that can be asked regarding this.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I know we didn't have our Meezan, the usual Meezan lecture series, but we got more out of it. This in like a different format too, where we had a lot of general questions, and I'm glad people, took this opportunity to ask those questions. And thank you for giving people this opportunity to also clear out their confusions. So, inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow in another textual study of the Quran session. And until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone.